suppose our first real encounter with the Royal Scottish Geographic Society came during virtually Shackleton, where Joe Wolfe, who's writer in residence, opened up the whole topic of Ernest Shackleton's time in the Royal Scottish Geographic Society. Mike inherits Ernest Shackleton's role, really, and he's also totally dedicated, totally active. In fact, if you were here yesterday morning, he ran the great class on climate change with the Leaving Cert geography students in the local school. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Mike and his wife Catherine to Shackleton Autumn School this year. And now Mike is going to give us the next lecture. So,
thank you very much, Kevin. What a pleasure it is to be here. I'll try and speak slowly as well, as Michael very correctly pointed out earlier, so try to not lose anybody. What fantastic news that you guys have got the funding to move your project forward. So I think that is utterly wonderful, and as somebody who's been involved in capital fundraising a number of times, I understand how difficult that is to do as well. So massive congratulations from us for what you're doing here. So I work for the Royal Scottish Geographical Society that, as Kevin said, Ernest Shackleton worked for briefly. And what I was going to hopefully do is just give you a flavour of some of the things that we have that reflect that period of time, and perhaps also just a sense of what we do as a society still. We were established back in 1884 by David Livingstone's eldest daughter, Agnes, and the mapmaker John Bartholomew, who was only 24 at the time. He was described, I think, by Hero Mill actually as having the taste of the 20th century on his tongue, which I thought was a fantastic phrase. And it's an important point actually, because when Shackleton came to the organisation, he came with a desire and an interest in waking it up a bit, modernising it and keeping it fresh. So although they are huge shoes to fill, I actually can recognise a lot of that in the work that I've had to do as well. So it's been really quite interesting to work out more about that story and that history. So the society itself is 130 odd years old. It is, as a charity, a membership charity, we tend to have this sort of cycle that every 15 years, roughly, we run out of money. And something else happens, and usually it's okay. And that can be in lots of different means, but actually about 30 years ago, we ran out of money, and we moved to Strathclyde University in Glasgow from our home in Edinburgh, so we'd always been in Edinburgh up until then. And as a consequence, a lot of our collections items were moved into temporary storage. And it was only when I started in 2008, we were able to move the society to Perth, which is its current home, about an hour north of Edinburgh, that we actually had the room to bring the collection together. Not all of it. I still have a kilometre of books at Strathclyde University that I do not have the shelving for. But we moved the collection into our new home, and as a consequence have slowly, after raising the money to get the building up, been able to open it back up again. And one of the great joys, and something I'm going to try to explain and I hope share with you now, is this absolute delight that we open boxes that haven't been opened in 25 years, and you're never quite sure what you're going to find. And one of those items I'll speak about just now. So, on with the rest of the talk. So, I might hold this, sorry, because I can't look away from apologies. So I titled the talk Difficulties Are Just Things to Overcome. After all, the very famous Shackleton quote, it appears on the wall of our office and is a constant reassurance when things are going wrong. So what do we do? What does the RSGS do? So it's still obviously a very dynamic charity. It's been around a long time. Our first role is to inform society, inform people about the science. We actually help set up geographies and education within the school's curriculum. It used to be part of English around about when Shackleton did the job.
We set up all the university departments of geography in Scotland and all the chairs of geography initially as well. So we've been involved in the formal education for a very, very long time. But we're also involved in informal education too, so we do quite a lot of work around all sorts of different issues. And one of the great joys about geography is it sort of gets everywhere. So, examples back in 2014, for example, we did a magazine on the importance of energy security, and particularly in relation to Ukraine. Also in 2014, we did a magazine looking at the possible prevalence of zoonotic diseases like coronavirus and why we should all be more prepared. So information is a really useful thing and it's a really important part of our job. Another area is to sort of interconnect, it's to join people together. There's huge amounts of knowledge and expertise, but sometimes it sits in silos. And something I think geography is really good at is getting people out of those silos and getting people to talk to each other and share ideas and information. And that's something we're really keen to do and work on a lot. We're quite heavily involved at the moment in Scotland around the whole future of agriculture and how agriculture plays a role towards net zero and takes notice of climate change more. And also perennial issues like town centre regeneration, which of course is another issue that most town and city centres are still struggling with closing shops and moving away from high streets. So lots of interesting issues like that. We also think it's not enough just to inform people and to interconnect. If we're actually coming up with solutions, we need to help influence positive change. And that's another area that we do work on. We produced our own magazine for COP26, which was the Glasgow Climate Conference. We have a couple of copies at the back. And while I'm on it, I also put some tickets together. These are some of our replica tickets when Shackleton spoke for us in Glasgow, so please do help yourself to those on the way out. And what else? Other things. Our train service is absolutely terrible. Currently, it actually was quicker in 1886 to get from Edinburgh to Perth than it is today. And my only slight disappointment is since I started campaigning on this issue, it's actually got slower. So maybe I'm not very successful after all. But train service, of course, there's these sorts of things that require a bit of influence. Can we do better? Can we improve the way things are done? And the other bit that I think is really important, and a lot of what I was hoping to talk about today, is about inspiration. It's not enough just to inform people, it's not enough just to connect people together, it's not enough to just influence. You also have to inspire people that change is possible and desirable, and hopefully maybe lift ambition too. And again, I think that's something that Shackleton absolutely walked and talked. So, again, sometimes we just celebrate things because they're fun, like the great outdoors. This is a kayak at Montgomery following up a waterfall. And we also run 100 talks a year all over Scotland. And again, that was part of, all of these were sort of parts of the role that Shackleton would have done as the Director Secretary. So, we all know Anna Shackleton, I think we know all of these main issues, main facts. Of course, next year is a big year. The quote I wanted to use was Robert Falcon Scott's, not long after the discovery, where he described Shackleton as a marvel of intelligent energy. And I think in terms of his work at RSGS, that perfectly sums up the man that he was. So, for the Society, he came and worked for us in 1904-1905, wasn't there for very long, there for about a year and a half in the end. He came on as Secretary and Treasurer in 1904. He then left in 1905. 1906, immediately afterwards, he was elected onto our governing council. Our council used to be the governing body. When I first started out, my council had 37 members in it. If anybody's ever worked with a board and tried to get them to make a decision when there's 37 of them, hopefully you might have some sympathy. But that was very much the structure it has been for a very long time. Shackleton also was given a Livingston Medal in 1909 and was an honorary fellow in 1911. The fellowship is only honorary. The reason he probably waited as long as he did for this is he pretty much wrote to himself when he was the secretary asking for fellowship. And that was frowned upon and probably meant he was a little bit delayed when he finally did get one. So, this is the job, these are the things that are probably quite well known, and what I'm hoping to do is just put a little bit of light on some of the things that we found in our collections that we want to share. As I say, because we've only just started opening boxes that have been sitting there for a long time, it's almost as if institutionally we've forgotten some of the things that we have. So what I'm going to do is just share some of that with you, but I would say it's still at the early stages. I still think there's actually work to be done here about the impact of working for RSGS, both on the society, but also actually on the rest of the things that he was able to do through his career. So as we know, he was on the Discovery Expedition, a hugely important expedition. The eyes of the world were on that expedition, of course. And as we also know, he was sent from early on the supply vessel in the morning. And this is a picture taken on deck with Dr. Davidson, and that is Dr. Davidson's polymetal that we have in our collection, just sitting next to that picture. Of course, when you go back from Discovery, I always thought it was sort of hilarious to send your best raconteur and storyteller home early, so you can tell all the best stories, all the best parties. Seemed like a blunder, really, by Scott. But and allegedly, Shackleton was quite respectful of the fact that he didn't want to blow all the stories, of course. But he was gainfully employed. He was looking for work, of course. He was a little bit upset about the situation. Markham is quoted as saying that he realised how keen Shackleton's disappointment really was. But Shackleton was put to work doing things like fitting out the Terra Nova, and that brought him to Dundee. Obviously, Dundee is the city of discovery. It's where the boat still sits today, and obviously that's the first of those connections to Dundee. So whilst all that was going on, there were other things happening in the world of science and exploration too. And another one is that in the 1890s, Sir John Murray, who was on the Challenger expedition in the 1870s, which was a brilliant, brilliant piece of research science. It was 4 years around the world, everything they could do oceanographically that they could measure and test. And actually, one of my favourite facts about that expedition was they were trying to test the volume of the world's oceans. So literally every day, several times a day, they would throw a massive rope with a lump of lead on the end over the side of the boat and reel it in, and they'd have to do it at least twice to check they got it right the first time. And everybody hated this job. It took 20 years to digest all the science from that 4-year expedition. And John Murray was on that expedition and was one of the leaders in looking at the science. It was a really major sort of scientific figure of the day. What was interesting was about 10 years ago I came across a National Oceanographic Administration of America study where they'd done a satellite survey of the world's oceans to look at the volume, and it was about 2 to 3% different to the guys lobbing a bit of rope over the side of the boat. So we are much cleverer, but we're not as much cleverer as we think we're. Anyway, so John Murray, fresh from the Challenger, hugely into all the scientific delivery that Challenger presented and the opportunity for science. He actually gave a presentation at the RGS entitled The Renewal of Antarctic Exploration. And it called for a full-scale expedition to benefit the British science to the poles. It was very strongly supported at the time by Markham and also by the Royal Society, and a joint committee was set up to basically eventually put together the discovery. But it immediately seemed to have this slight challenge between the science and the exploration. And the Royal Society, of course, appointed Professor Gregory, who thought he would be in charge when the expedition got to land. Scott would be in charge on the boat, and eventually it was made fairly clear that Scott would be in charge full stop, at which point Gregory, the scientific officer, resigned. At the same time, William Spears Bruce, who was a leading Scottish polar explorer, he was also wanting to do as much science as possible. He was obviously a friend of Sir John Murray's, and he wrote to Markham and said, if you're going to put a book together, put 2, because one of them should be totally devoted to science. And Markham was afraid that to raise the money for 2 books would jeopardise the one boat, so he very strongly didn't agree with William Spears Bruce and knocked him back. And Spears Bruce, not to be put off, turned to the RSGS, assuming he was on the council anyway, and raised all the money to put his own boat together. And slightly, because he was annoyed with Clarence Markham, he called it the Scotia Expedition. Every single member of the crew was Scottish, and basically went ahead largely funded by the Coates family, which is why we get Coates Land. So, the Spears Bruce Scotia expedition, it was a small organisation in Edinburgh that had managed to fund their own Antarctic expedition. I think these things all played on Shackleton's mind. Spears Bruce, remarkable figure in his own right. He was actually taught by Patrick Geddes. He was friends with Nansen because he met him on the Jackson Armstrong expedition. And he also spent a year on boats with Prince Albert, who was probably the leading oceanographer of his day. He also had a really horrible job for about 3 years where he climbed Ben Nevis every single day to take weather readings. So he was an oceanographer, a biologist, a meteorologist, just a very polymath scientist. And by putting together the funding, as I say, they were able to go down to the Antarctic. They overwintered on Laurie Island, and they got bored. So if you look at a map of Laurie Island, every single physical feature is named after somebody on the crew, or their girlfriend, or their cat. Pretty much random names, I think. But Laurie Island, of course, sits in the South Orkneys. And there's lots of silly things to make of this. There's quite a famous piper and a penguin picture that a lot of people will have seen. They played the most southerly game of football ever, which is a silly picture that's held by the Scottish Football Museum. And I like to joke, I think Nansen was a massive inspiration to Bruce. They were very friendly after their accidental meeting. And of course Nansen led many lives and achieved many things. And I think he influenced, and not all of the other explorers really, but Bruce particularly, who set up Edinburgh Zoo, and he also set up the ski club, the Scottish Ski Club, and various other things. So he, again, was sort of inspired to do much more than just purely exploration. But the Scotia expedition, because it was absolutely fixed on the science, there was no suggestion of shoving flags anywhere, really. It was very much about oceanography, biology, etc., etc. It's probably one of the most important scientific expeditions into that area of that whole era, because of the amount of the work that they did. Just purely, it's nonsense, but I love saying it anyway. I always like to think that William Spears Bruce got such a taste for penguin when he was on Laurie Island. It was the only thing to eat, really. And I do wonder if that was part of his motivation before setting up Edinburgh Zoo. But that's just speculation, I don't understand. Anyway, so here we are. The Discovery is still in the Antarctic, but about to come home, and the Scotia is in the Antarctic, and not that far from coming home. So here we are, 1903, and Shackleton, who's been up to help fit out the Terra Nova, is invited to speak for the Society in Aberdeen and Dundee at the end of 1903. The speaker before him actually was I can't remember now. Boy to the North Pole. Robert Peary. So Peary had just spoken to the Society. A lot of other explorers in the room. And here's Shackleton giving a couple of public talks. And whilst he was in Scotland, he stumbled across the advert and was pointed to the advert for the vacancy at the Royal Scottish Geographical Society. So here is the advert, just here. And I'll highlight it one little bit, which was, it says, the vacancy is currently the office of secretary, salary £200 per year. The gentleman holding the office would require to be willing to give his whole time to its duties, because the predecessor was only part-time. He was a professor, spent most of his time professing and not running the society. And the next part I think is particularly important. It says it's particularly requested that there be no canvassing of members of council. So put in your application and leave it there, basically. So that was the advert. The salary equivalent, we think, is around £30,000 today. So reasonable salary. And lo and behold, Ernest Shackleton applied. And so when I talked about these boxes that we opened and found lovely things inside some of them, probably one of the most special is his job application. Here's a facsimile of it here. So, of course, he applied, and it hadn't really crossed my mind that people applied for jobs, but of course they did. And And so here is an application, and I'll just read it for you in case you can't read towards the back there. I beg to submit my application accompanied with testimonials for the post of Secretary to the Royal Scottish Geographical Society. In support of that application, I would state that I have had charge of all the stores and books on discovery. Also, the library, both scientific and general, was arranged and looked after by me. As regards the literary work, I may state that in 1900 I published a book on transport work which had a sale of 3,000 copies. I have written for the Nautical magazine, the Gardeners magazine, the Illustrated London News, and for the latter paper I have a contract for 15 other articles. I also was editor, printer and manager of the South Polar Times, and so am conversant with the use of a typewriter. I have a knowledge of French, German, and a slight knowledge of Spanish, and I am fully prepared to devote all my time and energies in the interests of the Society, and hope, should I obtain the post, to increase its scope and power. So there's his application, and as I said, just highlight a couple of things, obviously mentioning South Polar Times and his work on the discovery for obvious reasons. The fact he was so clear that he would be prepared to devote all of his time and energies was a big plus, but he certainly did do that. So here is the application. I've laid it out here, it's actually on 4 pages. He's put a little piece on the front which just details the skills. Then the letter that I just sort of read out is the top half of the second page. And then he's straight into references and letters, supporting letters. And these are from William Huggins, President of the Royal Society, Clements Markham, President of the Royal Geographical Society. He's got a letter from Helen Aldrich, who's the Vice Admiral, and also, again, he's featured another letter from Clements Markham, who's got other correspondence in here. Not surprisingly, perhaps, he has a letter from Hugh Robert Mill, his close friend and confidant, and also from J. Scott Kelty, the Secretary to the RGS at the time. So pretty impressive set of references and obviously quite a weighty application. So those who maybe see it clearly may have noticed that there's some scribbling on the front of this job application. And it is of course shorthand that we think was taken during the interview. The challenge, as I'm sure you know, is it's not easy to read shorthand, especially, it's very personal. It's 100 years ago, we don't know who wrote it. And the other thing that I hadn't appreciated is that often shorthand, it sits on a line, so if you don't have any lines, it's actually harder to read again. So we thought, for fun, that we would share this with the local paper, the Courier in Dundee, and see if anybody could come and help translate the shorthand for us. And I'm pleased to say, I learned several things. The first is we got a very strong response. The second is, don't trust the public. We had a lot of responses. My personal favourite was a 4 or 5 page letter from a gentleman who said, I can assure you it is not shorthand, it is Greek. And he went on to explain why it was Greek. And it was the last line of the letter just killed me. He said, unfortunately, I don't speak a word of Greek. So that wasn't very helpful. However, there were some more helpful responses. And the truth is, we still don't know for definite what all of these lines say, but we have had a number of people trying to help put this together. So the first squiggle that I'm trying to highlight here, not surprising, member popular in geographical circles in London. I think that all sounds very plausible and very sensible. The second, again, as I say, we think, later completed some group training designed for navigation. Again, makes sense, it does sort of fit with his skill set. The third one, which I think is probably the most amusing of them all, really, because this is an important period for Shackleton. He's about to get married, and allegedly, as told his future wife, he didn't really fancy going back to the Antarctic. And this one is, we'll probably all share his enthusiasm for his next Antarctic visit. So, not sure it would be, who wouldn't share that enthusiasm, other than his wife. 4, showed experience as a journalist with the South Dakota Times. And finally, and again, as I say, estimate, various relevant reviews to the standard of sub-editor. And at the time he applied, he was a sub-editor with a magazine down in London, so hopefully that makes sense, but as I say, it's a little bit of supposition. So, that's the job application. Of course, getting the job then wasn't necessarily just assured. There were quite a few applicants, and it seems to come down to a split between Shackleton and Johnson. Now, the board were split, but then I just explained the size of the board, so that's maybe not surprising. But the other issue is that, ironically, it slightly came back to that sense of exploration versus science, because Johnston, we believe, was one of the crew on the Challenger. And there's Sir John Murray, who was the vice president of the organisation, obviously led that Challenger and a lot of science work around the Challenger. So you assume he was an ally, and the board was split. And I draw your attention back to the advert, no canvassing of council. And Shackleton obviously took that very literally and immediately canvassed the council. He got Hugh Robert Mill to intervene and have a chat with Ralph Richardson, one of the board, on his way through London, and sort of leaned on him there. And Shackleton was actually quite frustrated, I think, by this process. The only feedback he had to his CV was that there were 2 typos on it, which he was quite frustrated at. He wanted a little bit more feedback on that. And George Bartholomew, who was the man, one of our founders, and I mentioned earlier, had the taste of the 20th century on his tongue. John George wanted Shackleton. He wanted the young, thrusting man who was going to make changes. But he realised that he probably wasn't going to carry the day, so he delayed the board decision because he realised the wrong people were in the room. So the decision was pushed back to January the 11th. But on January the 11th, Shackleton was unanimously elected by the board. So something shifted over that Christmas, but everybody voted for Shackleton soon afterwards. And Mill described it, he said, within 3 months of his appointment, he had awakened the society to the full activity of its early years, and he even persuaded his bride to dispense with a honeymoon. So he really threw himself into the role completely. And there's some charming incidents. There was one where he found on the staff playing golf in the corridor outside. Instead of reprimanding him, took the golf club off him and then promptly put a golf ball through the front window of the office. And also he loved winding up the older members. He said, there's a typewriter in the office. That was a big novel development at the time. And there's a telephone. You should have seen the faces of some of the old chaps when it started to ring today. They said I could have it in, but it would take 6 months to get it. But that was 4 days ago, and by worrying, I got it in and working today. So within 4 days of a board meeting approving the first telephone, he'd actually managed to fit it. And he took great delight every time it rang, because it really annoyed some of the old members. He was definitely all up for sort of rousting people around. And of course then, the job. So what is the job? There were a number of things he had to do. He had to take minutes, of course, of all the board meetings, all the various meetings. Our archives are not that strong around this period, because he really wasn't that keen on paperwork. And he wasn't particularly good at it either. It was very splodgy and messy. There's quite a lot of corrections written in a different hand. And it really wasn't what he wanted to do. He wanted to do all the fun stuff and the exciting stuff and the challenging stuff. And so, events that he ran, well, we had an anniversary dinner at which Robert Fulton Scott spoke. William Spears Bruce was meant to speak, as was Clements Markham. Spears Bruce opted to be ill that day. And he also organised talks for Robert Fulton Scott. He obviously spoke for himself, William Spears Bruce. This is the talks programme on the right-hand side that you can maybe make out. So because we run a talk, we've always had branches in Aberdeen, Dundee, Edinburgh and Glasgow. So he was running these talks throughout those places. The last last of them on the list, and again I haven't had a chance to look at this fully, is Saint-Hilaire Belloc, who I think was a poet but also a politician, and interestingly a liberal. And this is into 1904, so interesting period, 1904, 1905, interesting period for Shackleton, because of course he started thinking about politics. And we also believe that he made the first approach to Amundsen to come and speak to the society, who was lined up for a talk, but not until 1906. This is a list of council members, and again, quoting Theodore Bell, he said, "Here Shackleton was in a new world which gratified him as he pleased it, and he made new friends who held the keys to many locks," and he certainly did. He'd really been very fortunate, I think, in a way, or maybe not fortunate, but I think quite consciously made this approach, because he recognised he was an organisation that had run its own expedition. There's some incredibly important people there. There's John Marriott's ring on the top right there. The top left is the Earl of Rosebery, who left the society to become UK Prime Minister. And Shackleton loved Rosebery at one point to get support for an expedition. And down the bottom there is William Beardmore, again on the council, and again another figure that would go on to be a very important figure for Shackleton going forward. He also got to hang out with really interesting people, including William Spears Bruce. And this chart, which appears in one of our journals, and the one we have in the archive is annotated by Shackleton, we believe was the result of him scheming with William Spears Bruce about the best possible route to get across the Antarctic. The interesting point about the map is the detail in the middle, where the route is being specified, is quite good. The detail around the end is a bit fuzzy, because it didn't really care. And possibly it didn't really know. So, some great people to hang out with. So here was this Irishman in Scotland. During this brief period in RSGS, he made a fantastic use of the networks in polar exploration and science. He gained a lot of public recognition. He gave a lot of talks. He gave the first schools lecture at Christmas and started that whole programme. And also gained recognition in many other ways too. He met a lot of important figures who would go on to help his career, made connections with some crucial funders. He understood the importance of winning the scientific lobby if he was going to be successful in putting an expedition together. And all whilst he was doing that, still managed to maintain his relationships with key figures in London. So he made a point of giving Clements Markham a fellowship during this period. And of course, the reason he left the society is because he started to he was still looking around what he wanted to do, and he decided to stand as a Liberal Unionist MP in Dundee. He famously said that he won all the hustings but lost the election because people vote for the party, not for the person. But absolutely, he was a very, very popular speaker throughout Dundee. He came fourth in the election with 13% vote, and the top two actually got selected, so the history could have gone very differently. It was on the basis of standing as an MP that he stood down. He offered his resignation to the council, which was accepted but took about 6 months to enact. So here is the advert in June 1905 for his replacement, and it's pretty much word for word as we mentioned the previous advert. Again, the last sentence this time is particularly requested that there be no canvassing or members of council. And there were over 300 applicants for that role. What we don't know is how many applicants there were when Shackleton got the job, so we don't know how much that is a recognition of him lifting the profile. But he certainly increased the membership substantially. All the public-facing things really moved on enormously. Of course, then his much more famous life began, starting with the Nimrod, but of course it was in large part supported by William Beardmore, who'd given Shackleton a job after he left RSGS and after he failed to get elected. So he worked for William Beardmore and befriended Beardmore's much younger wife. There is a rumour, of course, that one of Beardmore's motivations for funding Shackleton to go away was he was hoping he'd stay away. But Beardmore was obviously very critical about that early expedition, and these are tickets related to the talks that Shackleton gave for the Society when he received his Livingston Medal it was actually after the month, I understand, that he moved to Stanley from Edinburgh as well, so he was there until 1910. Then, of course, endurance, and again, this Scottish connection is quite strong. He wrote a number of letters, prospective letters to all sorts of funders. One of them was Sir James Caird in Dundee, and he asked for £50 donation. And Caird got in touch and said, if you come and visit me and tell me what you need money for, I'll give you £10,000. So Shackleton did, very sensibly, made that journey. And so impressed Caird, according to the Courier, he handed the elderly bearded figure, quietly handed the cheque across the desk for £24,000. So he must have just really blown away. And of course, it has become probably the most famous lifeboat in the world. Of course, lots of other talks, lots of interactions. Shackleton was on the council for his period in Scotland. He regularly came back to Scotland and spoke for us. Even the quest, which was funded largely by Rowett. Again, I mean, there is a Rowett connection in Scotland, but also I understand from Kevin that Rowett was married to one of the Cook's family. So again, a really interesting sort of connection, and just all of these little links that tie together. And I was just going to use a Nansen quote to sum this up really. I think this really did infect Shackleton. From first to last, the history of polar exploration is a single mighty manifestation of the power of the unknown over the mind of man. And that's, I do feel, definitely sort of gets to the heart of Shackleton's interest. So, interestingly, where does that bring the society today? The legacy continues. We have a Shackleton room in our office. This is a picture of it here. That's him in the Arctic book shelves that we have. That's part of our book collection. We also have a Shackleton medal, and this perhaps brings the link in around climate change. It's for leadership and citizenship in a geographical field, so it's very broad, but in sort of geography. But we have used that in many different ways, both to celebrate things like fair trade, as well as the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow in 2014, a number of international key figures in climate change, through people like Jacinda Ardern and others. So it's a very high-profile medal, and it's just keeping that whole issue alive. And we go back to that John Murray presentation in the 1890s, the idea that the geographical community sort of identified the importance of Antarctic exploration, and it focused a lot of efforts and energies from the whole of society in that endeavour. I think that's a really exciting example of what we should be doing today. Where should the geographical community be focusing our efforts now, and what are the key challenges that we all need to get behind? And as a society, I guess we've already decided part of that obvious answer is climate change. What I was going to do very quickly, if I may, is I wanted to show you this short video. And I think it's the point. I talked about inspiration being an important part of this. Inspiration really matters, exploration matters, but rather than me tell you that, I'm going to get Bertrand Piccard to tell you that whole line.
I think the best way to say thank you is to say how touched we are as promoters of the aviation project to be rewarded not by an aviation world, but by a geographic society. Because solar impulse has not only gone around the Earth, but it tries to protect the Earth. And I think this is the task of the explorers. It's not just to explore, but it's today to bring this message to key decision leaders and opinion leaders. Because when explorers speak about the world and about the Earth, they are credible because they've seen it. When explorers speak about life, they are credible because they risk their life. When explorers speak about why we thank you so very much for this evening and for this honor. Thank you so much.
So, it says it so much better than I could. Well, he's an absolutely wonderful speaker, by the way, if you ever get a chance. But this idea that inspiration lasts a lifetime is something really brought home to me. We did a bit of research recently. I was actually trying to work out which of the 1,000 talks we've done in the last 10 years our members liked the most. So we put a questionnaire out. I got a really unexpected response. I got quite a lot of letters saying, yes, it was Herman Bull in 1953. Which is not really the response I was expecting. But it does go to say that people, when somebody does inspire you, when somebody gets under the skin, it stays there. And I think the fact that so many people here today celebrating Shackleton's example is just a testament to that. So the work we're going to share today very, very quickly, as I said, things that we're doing, we've been convening in 14 different sectors across Scottish society to come up with solutions to climate change. We run regular media expert sessions with global experts. We started the Future Generations Fund. It's really an example to the UK government to try and inspire them to do the same. But the idea is to put some money by to actually help fund things for young people that give them a bit more hope about what we're, and also show them that we care a bit more about their future. We also put a film together for COP26 in Glasgow, looking at the progress that's been made around climate. And we also wrote a climate solutions course for businesses and managers, which we launched in 2019, and now has about 100,000 people on that course, trying to help managers and people in positions of authority now understand this issue and what we can do about it. So that's the type of thing that we do day in, day out. I would like to think that Shackleton, a man who loved the Antarctic, would approve. It's difficult to not be aware of climate change if you work in these areas. And to finish, as I said, there are tickets at the back, there are magazines at the back, please do get yourselves. But my very last thing I would like to do, if I may, is to celebrate the fact that you're getting a wonderful museum, is to give you your own copy facsimile of the CV for your archive. So.
And we have time for a few questions. So if anyone has any questions for Mike, we have about 5 minutes. Anyone? Great.
You mentioned animal pathogens and in the context of the pandemic happening, and that you warned about this a few years earlier. I'm wondering what strategies you're investigating for hearing the voices that don't get heard, for the important messages that don't get across.
How do you give voice to some of these less heard people and less heard perspectives? It's actually something we do try to work on quite hard. Our magazine, the way we produce that, everything we do is very lightweight. Again, I quite like to think Shackleton would approve. We never have any money, so we just have to be creative. But we design things to be simple, if that makes sense. So when we produce the magazine, we're quite bold and ambitious. So, which is an accident, actually. We were doing a magazine on economic alternatives and well-being indicators. And all of the quotes online on well-being are all the Dalai Lama. So just purely for a laugh, I wrote the Dalai Lama and asked if he would write an article for a magazine. And slightly to my horror, he did. But what it did was it made us very bold. But next to that, we had young students talking about their perspective, and professors, and anybody. So the way we try to sort of build a picture of an issue, it's not a preachy, we told you it was going to be coronavirus type of thing. It's more, here's the knowledge out there, here's all the expertise, here's what everybody thinks is going to happen, what's likely, different perspectives around click up. But usually it's more click up than you think. But we try and mix up those voices. And probably the most obvious example, actually, I do conveniently have on here, which is sheer serendipity, is one of the groups that don't always get voice that they want is young people. So we actually have recently set up a young geographers committee and advisory board, but we also run a magazine for them. So what we actually do is we bring together a group of young people and mentor them in how to produce a magazine. And they can write anything they want, they can commission anybody they like, they will help them, we'll use our network to support that, we'll help them produce the magazine, but they design it, they commission it, they write half of it. And yeah, we'll just point them in the right direction. I think this is the one that I've got a couple of them here, but it takes them about a year to produce. And Mary Robinson is one of the sort of speakers that one of the contributors to the magazine. So they'll reach global leaders just like we can, but they'll also reach kids in school or people from different communities. So we do what we can, but it's definitely quite a difficult thing to do, actually, to be honest.
Thank you.
Two questions. One, have you ever traveled to Antarctica? And two, have you any comments about the increasing numbers of people who go there to have a go at it and then come home maybe with some message? Should we not be concerned about the impact of this?
So should we be concerned? I mean, it's difficult. There's probably over-tourism in many different areas. I mean, in Scotland, you've got tiny places like Kirkwall getting 200 cruise ships turning up with more people on board than live in the village than the entire surrounding area. So yes, it has its impacts. I think, in the answer to your question, I haven't been to Antarctica. No. That I've never been anywhere near it. The closest I've got, I think, is Peru. But so no, I haven't been there. Is there probably too much tourism in some of these places? Yes, it's a challenge. And actually, one of the things that's also interesting with an archive is being able to reflect back on some of this and how it fits in a historical context. So it's actually, William Burn Murdoch wrote a piece on Spitsbergen in 1926, I think, on a visit up there. And he wrote this incredibly poignant piece, which is quite remarkable for a man who shot everything that moved. Basically saying that he thought that polar bears would only be visible in zoos and museums by the time we were here. So, and he observed that in 1930. So this issue about disturbance and pollution and people and everything is a constant one. I don't know the answer, but personally, yes, I think there's probably too much, too many people going down and walking. Hopefully the VR, if anybody hasn't tried the VR actually, that's available, that's a great way to travel, much cheaper as well.
So I think we've one final question.
Mine's not a question, mine's a response to the tourism in Antarctica. I totally agree the VR thing that's in the ballroom is completely fantastic and a great way forward. However, I would say in defence of tourism in Antarctica, tourism per se has an impact on the planet, yes, but the tourism in Antarctica has far less impact than it does in nearly every other part of the world, because the tourism in Antarctica is incredibly responsible and well regulated. And I would say that the people who visit Antarctica, in a bit the same way that they do the VR experience, come back as ambassadors for the pristineness of Antarctica. And it's the national operators who are probably doing more damage than the tourists, if anyone's doing any damage. Oh, and also, there are microplastics in the Antarctic now that have not come from people visiting the Antarctic. They're just in the atmosphere, and the global impact, the global what's happening in the planet is affecting Antarctica in a more adverse way than the tourists going down there.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Lynn. Thanks a lot. Just one or two pieces of housekeeping. Firstly, if we could get an indication, the bus tour tomorrow afternoon, if we could just get a show of hands of who intends going, we just need to get a proper size bus. So that starts looking like 20 people, top of the head. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so right. thanks for that. Secondly, just picking up on the virtual reality, you can encourage people with the operating that, so please go out and try and get a look at that. And finally, if you could get back 5 minutes early, if you could get back at 1:45, we just want to try and run everything scheduled in the afternoon. There's 1 or 2 extra things on top of for icebreakers and so on. So if we could start at 1:45, that would be great. Okay? And we're back with Hugh Turner and his commercial radio. Okay, thank you.
Suggesting that you add up all the carbon and that's getting to use one.